I was quite bad with procrastinating.
I would like to often do overtime at work instead of studying sometimes.
Until the phase set in, it was quite hard to motivate myself.
Motivation is like your daily coffee. You need to drink it daily in order to make that effect.
Hello, I'm Kritika Adatia and I'm a chartered accountant. I now support accountancy students through their training. And as an educator, I'm regularly up close and personal with some of the common issues people face while studying for and sitting their accountancy exams. So in this series for the ACCA, I'm chatting to experts about strategies we can all use when facing some of life's challenges. And this week, we're looking at something so many of us struggle with: procrastination. Putting off what we know we should be doing, but can't quite bring ourselves to start or finish. Why is it that so many of us struggle with procrastination? What's happening in our brains when we procrastinate? And what strategies can help us improve how we manage our time? This is On Your Marks, because you'll never know until you try. With what can sometimes feel like constant distractions available to us, whether that's TV shows on demand or texts on your phones, it's no wonder that a lot of us struggle with procrastinating on tasks. I know I used to get distracted by notifications on my phone all the time, whether it's WhatsApp, iMessages, social media, or email. It would mean I'd start a task, get distracted, and realise I'd wasted 20 minutes scrolling or being unproductive. I now have most of the notifications on my phone turned off, but interestingly, I still find myself turning to my phone when I'm putting off a task. I'm sure you can relate. So with me today to chat about all things procrastination, I've got Dr. Julia Ravey. She's a neuroscientist, podcast producer, and author who has recently written a book called Braintenance, a scientific guide to creating healthy habits and reaching your goals. So, Julia, are you a procrastinator?
Yes, I'm a massive procrastinator. It's always on the things that really mean a lot to me as well. And even sometimes things that I'm looking forward to doing in my head. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get down and work on that thing because I know it's going to bring me the thing that I really want. And then I come to do it and it's just nope, I don't want to. I remember, I think it was in my third year of university, my dissertation. It was on something I really cared about. And I was like, oh, I really am excited to dig into that research. But every time I come to do it, I found it so difficult. And that was until the very, very last night before my deadline. I was in the library, I'm not joking, all night. I wouldn't recommend it. It was the worst feeling I've ever felt. I had to drink so much coffee. And I was like, I just need to get this done because the deadline is tomorrow. The only thing that could make me do it was that deadline being there. And I know I could have done even better in that assignment if I'd just done the work beforehand. But it's not a logical thing, when you're in that moment, you know that you should be doing it, but it's so difficult. So difficult.
Do you know what? Firstly, I'm so glad you said you're a procrastinator because as someone who's studies the brain, knows a little bit about it, I was thinking maybe you have the magic, that or it's some sort of tip or something that stops yourself from procrastinating. So firstly, thank you. You're a procrastinator. Makes me feel a little bit better. So you mentioned that obviously there's, you had a deadline to work towards. That's what propelled you to want to get your dissertation done. But why is it that we procrastinate?
Yeah, I think with procrastination, what it is when it comes down to the bare bones of it is it's a decision. It's a type of choice that we're making. And our brain is making thousands of decisions every single day. Some of them you're really conscious of. If you go to a coffee shop and you're like, what do I want to order? You're thinking, oh, I'll have a latte or I'll have a cappuccino or whatever. Other things are a bit more unconscious. The route you take to work, for example, you just go. And sometimes you go, how did I even get here? Your brain has decided which route you're going to take because you take it all the time. So I think when it comes to making a decision, our brain is constantly doing that. And what it is doing in that moment is it's thinking of all the options I could possibly do and giving each of them a value. And this valuation process can take into account things that we actually want. So if you had a goal of okay, I really want to eat more vegetables and you're at the cafeteria, you look at the choices on the board. One of the values that your brain could be thinking is, that dish has got loads of vegetables. So that's going to be good, good, good. But there are other things that the brain takes into account that maybe aren't so much in alignment with what we consciously might want. So if you're really hungry or really, really tired that day, you get those carb cravings. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want the dish that's covered in loads of cheese. Give me the cheese. And that value is like, that option is given a higher value. Or it could be as well like the environment around you. So if you go to the same coffee shop every single day, you might feel like you just get the regular. Your brain is like, oh, we always get that one thing. So that option is valued higher. So you have basically your brain constantly making all these calculations as to what should I value the most. And with procrastination, your choices basically are, should I do this thing which is maybe really hard, or maybe it means a lot to me? Or should I go and scroll on my phone? Should I do something which is really relaxing? Should I do something which is going to feel nice and fun right now? So it's actually like a no-brainer when it comes to that type of choice.
So that's really interesting what you've just said there, and it's helped me to understand what's happening in my brain a little bit better. So I know you've alluded to this already in the answer that you've just given, but I'm going to ask, what's happening in our brains when we are procrastinating?
Procrastination in the brain is a battle, okay? Your brain is in a battle, and this is particular areas of your brains are fighting for which choice you should make. So you have these areas in the front of your brain which are more logical. They're concerned with future planning. You know, if you have long-term goals, that's sort of where it's making calculations as to what actions you should take to align with those goals. But then buried a bit deeper in the brain, we have areas involved in emotions. So these areas are to do with, it could be like fear, sadness, joy, all of these sort of emotional responses we have. That area is also fighting for which choice should be made. So in procrastination, you have this battle going on in your head of the logical areas of the brain versus the emotional areas of the brain. And really procrastination happens when either the emotional centers are very, very loud. So if you sit down to work, you could be thinking, right, I know right now if I do this study session, I'm going to hopefully pass my exam. So that is the logical centers going, yes, 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 do the work. But if in that moment your emotional centers are saying, oh my goodness, this is so hard, if that is louder than the logical centers, then the emotion is going to win out. Also, it could happen sort of the reverse way as well. If the logical areas of the brain, these frontal areas, are a bit quieter in their response. So say, for example, you go to sit to do your work, but you don't really have that sort of long-term goal in mind. You're a bit like, well, what's the point in doing this? Or the deadline is far away. If the deadline is far away, you go, doesn't matter. I can put this off till tomorrow. Yeah. If you don't have that like long-term sort of logical focus, then the emotional centers could win out again, because that is a weaker signal. So really, when we are procrastinating, we are in this battle between logic and emotion. And that's what's going on in our brains. And all of us will procrastinate a little bit more or a little bit less than each other. You know, all our brains are unique. So some people might find it easier to exert this self-control. Some people might find it a little bit tougher just because of our genetics, our experiences. So each of us will have a tendency to procrastinate more or less than each other as well. So I'd say like procrastination is something that you're always going to come up against. And it's not something that you should take as like, I don't care about what I'm doing, or not something you should take as like, oh, I'm rubbish as being a student or trying to study. It's something that we're all going to face because it is this decision point, and it's just the brain working as it should.
Amazing. So just so I hear you correctly, you're talking about the emotional part of your brain kind of being in a little bit more overdrive than the frontal logical part of your brain.
Yeah, that's it. Because if you think about a task that we procrastinate on, a lot of the times there is sort of emotion loaded there, because often it means a lot to us. So that is something which can be quite emotionally intense. Also, it could be something which is quite difficult and hard, stressful. So what that's creating in the brain is sort of emotional discomfort and uncertainty. The brain does not like uncertainty or discomfort. It will try to escape it. But also when you come to do a task as well, it could be factors outside of just the task itself. It could be that you haven't slept well that night. It could be that you're hungry. It could be that there are other things in your life that are going on, which means those emotional centers are on a bit more of a high alert, and that makes it harder to exert that control. So I think, yeah, when you sit down to procrastinate, when you sit down to work, that is going to be something that comes up more often than you might anticipate.
That's really fascinating. So I guess the emotions that you're describing, are they essentially what lead us to not wanting to get started with something? So how is it that we get over that initial hump of wanting to get started with something? And how does motivation feed into that as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of us have probably felt this before. It's almost like the fear of starting something is worse than actually doing it. And you build it up in your head to be this huge thing. And once you actually do it, you go, oh, it wasn't that bad. So what we want to do is try and get over that initial hump to sort of show to ourselves, look, it's not that scary, it's not that hard, it's not that bad. So what I like to do is try and think of something like really, really small that I can do as sort of a starter task. So for example, if I was trying to write an essay, my starter task would be, okay, I'm just going to write 3 sentences. That I think gives you like a long enough time to sort of try and get into something. But 3 sentences, I mean, in your brain, you go, I can write 3 sentences. Come on. You're not thinking I'm going to write 1,000 words. You think 3 sentences, that's great. If you're sitting down to do like a practice maths problem, you say, I'm going to do 1 problem and that's it. And after that, I can stop if I want to. But I find like 9 times out of 10, once you actually start doing it and get into it, you will keep going. So it's nice to have like a mini goal to sort of get you going. I always find to get over. Then when it comes to motivation I have a funny relationship with, because I think like it's a great thing when you have it. When you feel that like motivation wave, you're riding it, like New Year's resolution, that type of vibe, like it feels amazing to have motivation and you're like doing your work and you feel great. But if you don't have motivation, then you feel really, really rubbish. And it can almost be read as like a sign for your brain of, oh, I don't have motivation, therefore I don't want to do it, or therefore I can't do it. So I think with motivation, you should see it as like an emotion. Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. It's not always going to be there. So I would say like what is quite important with revision and trying to get into a routine and not procrastinate is to say, right, I'm going to study short amount of time, but I'm going to do it consistently. So that could be, it's going to be every weekday at, I don't know, 9 in the morning. And so you have a little slot. It's almost like an appointment in your diary. You have a little slot there and you show up and do it. And if motivation's there, great, you might want to go a little bit longer. If it's not there, you turn up, you do your small little task, you try and keep going a little bit, but if you can't, you've done your small task and you move on and you show up the next day. And I think it is about that like repetition to really like drill it into your routine.
That's refreshing to hear that motivation is just an emotion, because often you think that if you want to pursue something, that innate motivation has got to be there. So that's really quite refreshing to hear. And you spoke about sort of blocking out time to complete these small tasks. So how important is time management in all of this as well?
I think time management is a funny one, because when it comes to procrastination, I think time management can help. But I think what the problem actually is emotional management. So with time management, it's like, okay, I've got my diary, I'm going to block things out. But we all know that if your head's not in the right space, you could have the perfect diary, colour coordinated, bam, 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 I've got it all in there. If your head's not in the game, you will just not do it. So I think with procrastination, it is about being able to override that emotional discomfort that you feel. So with the small little tasks we were talking about, like getting over the hump. And there are other things other little methods that I definitely have in my back pocket, which can help. But time management can help, I'd say, with that, because a lot of the time with these tasks we procrastinate on, a big negative emotion we feel is overwhelm. You can look at it and go, oh my goodness, I've got a whole syllabus to learn for this exam. I need to know all of these different things. I don't know any of them. And that overwhelm can drive us to just not want to do it. So I would say with time management, the way we can help get rid of that emotional sort of overwhelm is to break it down. Like take your syllabus and break every topic down into subtopics, even subtopics if you want to, and then sit and put them into your diary of like what you're going to do exactly on that day. You could do this if you have an exam coming up. You could do it for a whole syllabus, or you could do it like week by week if that's a little bit more how you feel. You could sit on a Sunday and go, right, what am I doing each day this week? But you've got your list there, and that means that when you show up to do your work, you're not having to go, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed, what should I do? You've got it there in front of you already. So you know, like that takes out something off the table already. Right, today I'm studying this one thing. So I think that's how time management can really help us. And then showing up again, like repeatedly over and over again. You want to get your study routine almost to be a bit like brushing your teeth. Something you just do. No drama, you just show up and you do it. And I think because studying, the like connotations of studying and what it can lead to has such a big, oh my God, this could change my life, because it could. But if you just take it as like, okay, I'm just going to go to my desk today, show up, and I'm going to do my work. If you have no drama, it's much, much easier to do. So time management can help with that emotional management side of stuff. Definitely, it can just remove some of that intensity around the situation.
I like that. So you've really tied that into just planning out things so that as a student, let's say listening to this, they're thinking, right, need to get on, book my exam, right, I've got the exam, here's my syllabus, let's break it down. This week I'm covering this. That's a fantastic actionable step to take away. Now, you mentioned routines as well there. So with routines, not everyone finds it easy, right, Julia? So what are your sort of tips and advice around setting routines? What are the best practices around that as well?
I think routines are hard because people can look at the word routine and go, oh, so boring. Oh, it's so boring. But I think boring is sometimes good. Brushing your teeth isn't fun, but you do it every day, So having a bit of boredom is actually quite good. It's better to be a bit bored than have a lot of drama around it. But the thing with routine, which is difficult, is life. So you could have like the most perfect routine that you think in your mind. There's something happens in your life and that gets all like thrown out the window. So I think what's important is to like look at your diary, keep your revision time to be like a sort of short-ish period that if you could extend it, you could. I'd say it's better to do it like over a longer period of time, short bursts every day, than try and cram and like feel like you've got to cram it all in the last minute. So I would say like look for a short amount of time and which window could you fit it in your day. Some people might think, oh, I've got like kids, I've got a job where time always overruns. I think where in your day could you fit that 20 minutes or something like that? Get it in there and consistently show up and do it over and over again as much as you can. Now, it's not going to happen every single day, but I think if it doesn't happen one day, dust yourself off and the next day just try again. And if you find it's not working for you, like experiment. Like it doesn't have to be, okay, I've picked 9 o'clock and that's what I've got to stick to. No, like experiment with it as well. And I would say like really think about when you work best. We all know sort of when we work best. I know for me, the morning is my time. But if I'm not in the right zone, I will stay up too late, be watching that Netflix, watching that TV, and then the next morning I'm too tired to get up and then I miss my sort of time where I would be studying. So it's about like looking at your entire day and thinking, if I went to bed half an hour earlier, that means I could get up a bit earlier and do it then. So I would say experiment, have a bit of fun with it, play around with it and see where it fits into your day. And yeah, if it's a little bit boring, as in like you're showing up to the same thing every day, I think that's not a bad thing.
Okay, so it's a case of figuring out what works best for you. And like you say, everyone, it's going to be unique for everyone. I just want to circle back to something you said about sort of cramming and this idea that, especially with students, there tends to be that tendency to cram. And you also mentioned something about potentially giving yourself a break. How important is it, to also take breaks? And how does that sort of feed into procrastination? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's vital. Like taking a break is so important for your brain to digest the information that you're trying to remember. And the brilliant thing about our brains is the more you repeat and go over stuff, the more it's going to remember and retain that information. So if you give yourself a really good run-up time to an exam and you do a little bit each day and then you're covering that material over and over again in little bites, then you're going to retain that much better. If you're trying to cram, what you're trying to do there is keep all of this brand new information in these sort of frontal parts of your brain where we have our short-term sort of memory. It doesn't have really enough time to sink into that nice long-term memory. It's still too fresh. So I would always say like the longer run-up you can get, the better, so you can cover the material over and over again. And taking breaks too, like your brain needs the break to be able to like, oh, that idea just clicks together. You always have your best ideas when you're in the shower, when you're on a walk. That's because your brain is in a different zone to when you're focusing on, I need to learn this information. It allows those connections to sort of, oh, that fits with that fits with that. And things just click and start to make sense. So breaks are vital. And if you don't take breaks, those emotional centers will be screaming. So when you come to do your work, procrastination is probably going to happen more often if you haven't given yourself any time off.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that as part of your planning, you ought to filter in some breaks there as well.
Plan your breaks like your study. I'd say, because it's so easy to be like, oh, I've got to do this task today, this task, and then you don't put in any time to break, and you'll have some empty gaps in your schedule, but then the empty gaps, that can all of a sudden run into, oh, I have to do this, or I could keep working, I could. Guilt-free breaks, you want to put them in there and you go, this is my 2 hours where I'm going to just chill and no pressure. During university, I would do that. I would work really early in the morning. I would finish by 3:30, 4, and I wouldn't think about work. I think if you have it, you do it, you let your brain relax, let all that sink in, and go from there. So yeah, definitely schedule breaks.
Yeah. So with ACCA, we have students that will book their exams, and generally they'll have a 12 to 13 week window. And within that 12 to 13 week window, we often tell our students that they ought to have some time for planning and then studying and then practice. Granted, there's an overlap between the studying and the practice, but does that generally fit in with the recommendations and advice that you've been giving us through this conversation today, Julia?
Yeah, I think that is really good. The planning, that takes out that drama because you know what you're going to do. And I actually like really enjoy the planning. Like I sit with my cup of tea and I'm like, oh, let's map out my weeks. And yeah, I really enjoy that. So if you're planning in advance, that means when you show up to do the studying, you know exactly what you need to do. And then with the studying, you have these little tiny mini goals almost to tick off as you go along, which is a really nice thing for your brain to have. I think when we procrastinate sometimes as well, it's because we don't have like a big reward when we go to do, say, a study session. But if you have, today I'm going to do syllabus section 1A, A, B, or whatever it is, then you have like a nice thing to tick off. You've got something like, I've completed that, rather than just like, oh, I need to revise again today. You don't have any element of reward or satisfaction with that. So I think having the studying as broken down into little bits, that's really helpful for like giving you a little bit of motivation. And then with the practice, the brain loves repetition for remembering stuff. So practicing things over and over again, that is going to let it really sink into your memory. When it comes to the exam, you'll be able to hopefully retain that information and like get it out.
Well, that sounds great. And actually, just something I want to call out as well is that ACCA do have a digital tool. It's a planning tool called Compass, and we're often encouraging students to do that. So it's really nice that you've called out that, you know, we should have sort of mini subtasks that students can tick off, and our Compass Planner allows students to do that as well. So just to think about, you mentioned good habits earlier as well. Are there any tips about students being able to form good habits? And good study habits in general as well?
Yeah, I'd say like the things we've spoken about, like, you know, showing up at the same time every day, that's something which is good because it becomes part of your routine. I'd say something we don't really consider when we are forming new habits is our environment. What is around us? And that is something that I found personally in my life. You know, if I go back to my family home and I try and get up early in the morning, I find it so difficult because I'm in my teenage bedroom where I'm used to sleeping in till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. It's funny, when I'm at my normal house, I can get up early and work. But I think just think about what's around you. What have you done in this space before? Is this the desk where you always procrastinate? Why don't we try and work somewhere else? Or am I trying to work on the couch where I normally chill? Your brain's not going to be in the right space. So think of your environment. And another great thing I like is to have almost like a specific cue that can help you revise. So something, for example, like a candle you only light when you do your revision. That will give you almost like an initiator of like, it's time to revise. Your brain will sort of be capturing that information of maybe it's the candle itself or the smell that it has, that it's like, oh, I know when this happens, this is when I work. So giving yourself something like that, or a playlist, something like that you only have on when you study, that can really help to craft an environment where you feel like, yes, I'm ready to go and get in the zone.
I like that, giving yourself a little trigger for your brain to actually get into that zone.
Yeah, because we're triggered all the time. Like everything we do is normally triggered by something. Oh, I want to eat that food. That's because I'm hungry. You know, we have all of these triggers. So create a trigger for you to want to study. I think that's a good little tip that I've used throughout my whole time at university and beyond, really.
Yeah, and you also mentioned, you know, if this is the place where you study and you often procrastinate, reconsider that. I'm just thinking about students studying on their laptops, and laptops nowadays have YouTube and they have Netflix. And, you know, what can students be doing to avoid clicking into some of these applications so that they're actually just thinking about the studying and not, I mean, I don't know if we have an answer for that, but do you have any tips or thoughts?
Well, a good thing to do if you're able to study without the internet, you're able to get your bits and bobs out, you can just cut the internet. I mean, that's quite a hard one, but I know some people actually have those, you know, the timers you have for when you go on holiday, you put your lights on a timer. Some people have that for their internet router and it switches their internet off for like an hour and then it'll come back on automatically. But if you have a study time, it would then cut your router off. So you could actually be like, that's a very, we call it like we're trying to block out the distraction. We're trying to like completely block it. That's one way as well to manage your procrastination. If you know it's your phone, put that phone in a drawer and do not let yourself touch it. And build in procrastination breaks if you need to. So if you're like, oh, I just really want to check Instagram, you can be like, right, okay, well, I'll have a 5-minute Instagram check after I've done this thing. So when that urge comes, you have that built in. You're not completely like abstaining, but you're not going to do it and break your flow when you're working.
That's really great. And I did not know about this thing that you can turn off your internet. I think I might need to consider doing that. But thank you so much for the conversation. And just want to wrap up by asking you, you've said some great tips and tricks to manage procrastination, but do you have 3 strategies for kicking procrastination if you were to summarize them?
Yes, I would say if you're sat there and you feel like you want to procrastinate, these were 3 things that I would do. The first is something I call a pop-up list. So when I'm working, I have a piece of paper next to me. And if a thought pops into my head, it's normally very random. It'll be like, what time is it in New York right now? That is my brain trying to procrastinate. It's my brain trying to get me out of this thing that I find not comfortable and start Googling, oh, what's the weather like in Spain? So I will just write it on the list. And it's so funny when you look at that list, you realize how many random things your brain throws at you, because I would say most of them are nonsense, but it also captures the things that are important as well. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I go to work and it's hard, I will remember something important, like, oh, I haven't rang the dentist back and I needed to book that appointment, but then you've written it down. So you can sort of go, forget about it, I'll do it later. So pop-up list, I'd say, is number 1. 2 is a timer. So if you are struggling to work, I would say start yourself off with a 20-minute timer with a 5-minute break. It's called a Pomodoro technique. But I find that to be super helpful, because it then, if you want to procrastinate, you're like, well, I can in that 5-minute break. I can do whatever I want in that 5-minute break. That's mine. But for these 20 minutes, I am going to focus. It just eases you into your work and also prevents you from like feeling this desperate need to like stop, because you have got a time to stop. So I say that. And the third thing I would say is be curious about procrastination. We're all going to do it at some point. Why do you want to procrastinate on this thing? What is it about it? Is it that it's too hard? Well, if it's too hard, what is it about it that's hard? Is it this? I just don't understand this one tiny bit. Forget the study session for today. That is what you're going to do. So if it's too hard, is it that it means a lot to you? Well, that's like a good thing, really, in a way. So I think with procrastination, don't just see it as a sign of, oh, I'm going to stop and like fall into it and go, oh, I'm not going to do it. Ask why. Why am I procrastinating? And a lot of the time, it's actually a sign that you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and you're doing something that in the long run will really, really help you. So that's something that I always try my very best to do in that moment where I just want to like throw in the towel.
That's it from this episode of On Your Marks. Thank you, Julia, for chatting with me today. For more information about ACCA exams, you can go to www.acccaglobal.com/exams. See you next time. I'm Pratika Adatia, and this has been On Your Marks.